Hey everybody, welcome on our channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto unleashed his powers in Star Wars? Part 3. If you are new on the channel, don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video too. So without wasting any more time, let's start the story. Out of all the things that I have to learn, this is not one of the things I liked. At all. Come on, Naruto, it isn't going to be that bad. And besides, you should be glad that I am the one that is taking you on this little adventure. Obi-Wan would have been on your case the second you dropped your shoulders. Naruto and Anakin were walking through a residential building with the younger of the two, trudging through the halls of the fancy building, as he was about to do something that he never thought he would have to do in his life. Naruto thought about how the older master would have reprimanded him if he acted this way in front of him, and he had to admit that Anakin was the better choice. But he had to ask something that was bugging him. Where's Ahsoka? Shouldn't she be suffering through this as well? Anakin smiled as he remembered a time when he was against these meetings as well. But he had learned that these were important and were where many important details were exchanged. Ahsoka couldn't join us because she is receiving some teaching from Obi-Wan in a matter that he is more proficient in. And since this is an area that you need to work on, Master Yoda asked me to take you along to this meeting. He then looked over his left shoulder at the droid that had joined them. At least R2 is with us. Naruto looked at the astro droid with a deadpan. Yeah, but I think he is still a little peeved at me for forgetting he was there with us on the transport. Beep whistle whistle beep. After a few seconds of staring at the droid, he got the gist of what was said. Hey, I had a bunch of things on my mind at the time. Can you blame me for that? Beep beep. Of course, you would. Anakin smirked at the two as he looked over his shoulder at Naruto. He was impressed that the boy had begun to pick up on what the astro droid said. Something like that takes a while, but Naruto is a faster learner. His gaze shifted between the two before it stopped on the boy and added. Oh, and Shakti put in her vote as well. Said that you did well in remembering a lot of the political tactics during your studies. Naruto gained a look of betrayal at that. I've been betrayed. I've been tossed into the world rankers wouldn't dare enter. He made an overly dramatic gesture by pressing the back of his hand on his forehead. Anakin chuckled as he knew there was no real heat to what was said. She also told me that she will be going over anything you learned in this little trip. Naruto's dramatics came to an end as he had a look of genuine dread. Oh come on. During his time and training with the other masters, Shakti would come by and make sure that the information he had studied was still fresh in his mind. He understood why she did it and she enjoyed his time with her, but he dreaded it when she kept bringing up a pop quiz on him. He crossed his arms as he thought about it. Maybe she is making sure I am ready for when I actually get a master. Whether or not she is the one to take the role, she wants to be certain I'm ready. Anakin raised an impressed eyebrow. I'm surprised you figured that out. Not many would figure that. Naruto shrugged. I'm a lot smarter than I look and figuring people out is something I tend to be good at. He remembered when he was able to out Mizuki and sprung a trap on the man when he tried to trick the blonde into stealing the forbidden scroll. Naruto did steal it but handed the man a fake that was actually an explosive paint bomb that stuck the man to one of the trees since it was filled with a very powerful adhesive that he made for one of his pranks. He then chose to look at what he could get from the forbidden scroll and read it in front of the man just to piss him off. Mizuki was taken into custody when Hiruzen and his Anbu popped up after an hour. Plenty of time for him to learn the jutsu he was so prominent in. And some hints to a few others. Anakin nodded as he knew that Naruto had many different surprises for the Jedi. It was then that he remembered something that Shakti asked him to do. Lifting his arm, he bonked the boy on the head. Hey. What was that for? He placed his hand on the spot that was bonked and looked at the man in confusion. Anakin smirked at the boy. Shakti had told me to do that. Told me that you had sent a clone to study with her once while you stayed in the archives and with how I made a comment that you could have one of your clones take your place in this, she wanted to make sure you didn't sneak out of this. Naruto grumbled at this. I told her that I didn't do it on purpose. I was just so into what I was reading. What were you reading? When she found out that a clone took my place, I was reading about one of the other races. Anakin looked at him with intrigue. Which one? The Twi'lek. Naruto made a face of discontent as he said it. Ah, I assume that you have reservations about the way they went about things. He had an idea on what was going through the kid's mind as he was also very displeased about it. I just don't understand why they would sell themselves, their sons and daughters, just for whatever the Republic or the Hutts would give them. They sold themselves as slaves just to be part of the Republic but seen as little more than servants or workers in brothels. Anakin nodded. I understand how you feel, but it is what they chose. I agree that they deserve better, but I can say that there are those in the race that are doing what they can to get it out of such a view. Master Ayala is a key figure in that fight. Naruto nodded as he had met the Twi'lek Jedi master. She was a very nice person to talk to and she seemed to have a bit of mischief in her. It was nice to see another Jedi that wasn't so stiff in the rules of the Jedi. She is a duty-bound Jedi like many others, but she did it with a bit more leniency. The three made it to an elevator and entered as. Naruto looked around the hall as he knew he hadn't been here before. So, who are we meeting? He looked up at the man and saw that he had a somewhat indistinguishable expression, but he knew he had seen it somewhere before. He just wasn't sure where. Anakin looked ahead as he saw they were approaching a door. We are here to pick up someone before we head to the chancellor's office. At the mention of the old man, Naruto grimaced as he thought about the time he met the man for the first time. Everything in him was telling him not to like the man, but he knew that Anakin was friends with Palpatine. He learned this from talking with some of the other Jedi as he was learning the political hierarchy. Regardless of the standing between the man and the Jedi, Naruto was going to stay on his toes around him. But that was for later. Right now, he was interested in this person that they were about to meet. The two walked into a room and Naruto saw that there was someone who he assumed they were here to meet. Ani? Anakin smiled as he went to greet his friend. Hey Jar Jar. The Gungan hugged the older Jedi before taking a step back. Mesa, so happy to see you. But Mesa, understand Yasa busy. Well, being a Jedi isn't really a lenient life choice. It was then that Jar Jar noticed Anakin's companion. Hello, Mesa called Jar Jar Binks. He bowed in greeting to the young boy as he could tell that he was also part of the Jedi Academy. Naruto bowed in response with a smile. Nice to meet you, Jar Jar, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'll be going with you guys to meet with the chancellor to discuss whatever it is he wanted us to talk about. Anakin covered his mouth to hide his laughter, but he was unsuccessful as he was noticed by the blonde. Sorry, Naruto, but Jar Jar isn't the one that will be coming with us. Naruto tilted his head as wondered. Really? But then who are we? He paused as he felt someone else coming into the room. He looked to the side to see a woman walk into the room. Oh. Anakin followed Naruto's gaze and smiled at the sight of her. Padme. Hello Anakin. She smiled at the man before she looked at the boy standing next to him. She looked him over for a second before she smiled. You must be Naruto. Anakin has told me a lot about you and your feats. Including the ones you do in the temple. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked from her to Anakin. Wait, did you tell her about the time I switched everyone's lightsabers? Anakin looked at the boy in shock. That was you. The whole temple was in a scramble to get theirs back. Everyone went to everyone else to ask if they knew who had it or where to find the owner of the one in their possession. And with everyone going around, it was hard to find people. Took me all afternoon to find Master Windu to give his back. Naruto smirked as he crossed his arms. Oh, I am so sorry. Just keeping you Jedi on your toes is all. The amount of smugness in his voice was getting to the older Jedi since he had watched all the Jedi scramble to find out who did this and where their saber was. He had a good vantage point on the ceiling of the temple. And besides, Master Yoda thought it was amusing. Anakin remembered a couple of days after the event when Yoda had met up with him and Obi-Wan and said, "Spirited youth is, The two had no idea why the Grandmaster would say that to them, but now it all made sense. The thing is that he should have realized who was the cause when he found out that Shakti, Kit Fisto, Master Yoda, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Bariss Offee were the only ones that weren't switched. He had learned later from Luminara that her Padawan and Naruto had become friends after he was caught practicing his forms in the middle of the night. Though one thing did bother him. Why didn't he get Obi-Wan? That would have been a bit poetic. Padme smiled at the slight distress she saw on Anakin's face. I'm sure he didn't mean any harm to any of the Jedi. Anakin sighed as he looked at Naruto with a calculative look. It wasn't much of an issue to the ones that are adaptable, but it did feel odd wielding another's lightsaber. How did you even do all that? I assume you did it in the middle of the night when most were asleep, but that is still a lot of Jedi to sneak past, grab their weapon, and switch with someone else's. Naruto put his hands behind his head and gave a foxy smile. I let you try and figure that one out. I like to keep some surprises up my sleeve. It was a simple feat with him. All it required was his stealth and a mass of shadow clones. Getting the sabers was the easy part, waiting for everyone to fall asleep was the irritating one. Naruto shifted his gaze to Padme and spoke. So you're the one that is coming with us to meet with the chancellor, huh? He then looked at Jar Jar. If she is coming with us, what are you going to do? Mesa given duties Mesa gonna finish while Yasa meeting the chancellor. Naruto nodded. Guess, you won't be bored. He smiled at the Gungan and could not help but think that the alien was the lucky one. Padme then looked to Anakin. We should get going. We don't want to be late for the meeting. Anakin nodded as he gestured for the lady to lead the way. At once, my lady. Naruto narrowed his eyes again and beepized the two. After a second, he thought. Do you think that those two? Keep an eye on them. Remember that the Jedi code states no Jedi should make attachments, so we shouldn't jump to such a conclusion. Yeah, but you are the one that saw that it said nothing about romantic feelings and such. Only because you humans have a tendency to want a mate and get one when you can. I wouldn't be surprised if there were tons of Jedi that have a secret mate with them and don't tell the others. Doubt it. The Jedi live by the code, and I seriously can't imagine them doing something like that. Gee, I've seen how pushy you humans can be. Your mother had to nearly force your father into courting. We don't want to know. Yami looked at the fox and gave a deadpan look. And there are other races in the Jedi. You can't say humans when there are many different races there. Kurama rolled his eyes as he gave a non-committal shrug. All the same to me. Naruto mentally rolled his eyes as he bid the Gungan farewell before running after the two human adults and astro droid that left him behind. As he entered the elevator and moved behind them, he eyed Anakin and Padme with a scrutinizing look. Padme looked at Anakin as she asked. Were you given the details about what we will be discussing? I was informed that apart from the bill that needs to be fine-tuned, the Chancellor has information that is vital to the Republic cause. Not much else. I was tasked with hearing it out and give the information to the Council. After that, they will make a decision. Well, the bill is about the facilities that are offered to those that join the Republic and allow us to set up base in one of their systems. Well, apart from protection from the droid army, we do offer them a placement in many different facilities the Republic has. Well, many think that we don't offer enough while others think we are being too generous. We need to discuss the bill to see if there are any adjustments that need to be made or if there should be special actions done to those that have their own way of doing things. Well, it is nice to be considerate to those that live differently than. Are you two dating? Anakin and Padme stopped dead in their talks when they heard this and turned around to look at the boy that was beepizing them. Both were able to keep their composure with Anakin asking. Why would you ask that? Naruto looked between the two as he spoke. There is something off in the way you two talk to each other. Not really the stuff you're talking about but the way you speak. There is a fondness in your voice that I notice isn't as strong as when you talk to Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, or anyone else. Not only that but there is some sort of happiness in your eyes that I see when you look at her. He shifted his eyes to Padme. I kinda see it in her eyes too, but I don't know her. But from what I've seen in you two, I am only guessing. Padme smiled as she shook her head. No, we are not dating. I've known Anakin for years so we are just close friends. Anakin nodded as he looked at Naruto. Yeah, just close friends. Despite how well they kept their facial expressions set to not give anything away, it was not good enough to get past the tiny tells they had. Mostly from Anakin as his eyes shifted a bit as he spoke and he was slightly too fast getting his eyes off her. Not to mention. Kurama. They aren't dating, but they are not just friends. Naruto crossed his arms as he thought to himself. Padme doesn't seem the type to just have a fling, and Anakin is the kind of guy that would think such a thing is wrong. If they aren't dating but are more than friends then. The two adults were now internally worried as the boy continued to stare at them. The question he asked had thrown them off and they were not prepared for someone to out them in such a manner. But they kept their composure to try and weasel out of this. Wait. The two subtly flinched at the sudden word from the boy. Naruto lowered his gaze to their hands but saw no ring. Well. Since Anakin is part of an order that doesn't allow attachments, then. He lifted his gaze to their faces and saw the nervousness in their eyes. Are you married? The two immediately began to deny this at the same time as they were not ready for this. Naruto smirked at this as he was sure he was right, but he had to confirm it. Kurama. The amount of fear the two have now just gives them away, not to mention that everything they are saying right now are lies. I told you that there would be a few Jedi that have a secret mate. Anakin did not like the devilish smirk on the boy's face and he couldn't help but think that they were caught. Naruto. Well, that's nice for you too. The two adults stopped their panic as they became confused with how the boy just shrugged off what he had just learned. Padme tilted her head as she gestured to her and Anakin. Aren't you surprised about learning that one of the Jedi Knights being married to someone? Naruto shook his head as the elevator doors opened and he walked out in front of the adults with the astro droid following him. Nope. Even if the code says that a Jedi cannot form attachments, nowhere does it say that you can't find a romantic partner. Anakin walked up next to the boy as he was confused about his words. Wouldn't it be implied with the no attachments part? Padme was following behind them as she was curious about what the boy's response would be. Naruto shrugged as he looked at the older Jedi. Depends on how you look at it. You can either see it as very broad or too vague. I went with too vague so what you guys are doing doesn't go against the code. Anakin gave him a scrutinizing look as he said. That's grasping at straws from what I can figure. The four made it to the transport that would take them to the Chancellor's building. Naruto looked at the older Jedi with a deadpan. Do you really think you should be saying that when you are the one doing it? I'm just the one that figured it out. He walked into the transport and sat down with the others sitting on the other side. I looked over the code so many times, and I found there are a couple of loopholes that can be used, but someone was the one to point that one out to me." Anakin crossed his arms a little disapprovingly. "A little devious, don't you think?" Adm on the other hand smiled at the boy. "More like a politician. Did you ever think of getting into the politics of the Republic?" Naruto chuckled as he put his hands behind his head. "Nah, not my style. Too many words and paperwork for my taste. And from what I've seen back home there are so many hoops you have to jump through to be a good one." Adm nodded as she was beginning to like the boy. "I can agree with that." Anakin, though, narrowed his eyes at the boy. "Naruto. If you are going to ask me to keep this a secret from the council and other Jedi, you don't have to worry. You have your secrets and I have mine." "But secrets?" Naruto smiled at the man with a knowing smile. "Nice try. They wouldn't be a secret if I told you." Anakin huffed as he leaned back. After a minute he smiled at the boy. "Thank you." Naruto nodded as he looked ahead as the transport was moving. "I'm not going to take away someone else's happiness because the rules say otherwise. My sensei, Kakashi, the man with silver hair that stood up, has a saying he taught my old team. Those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash. It's something I think a lot of people should understand. The mission might be important, but you shouldn't have to sacrifice your friends in order to complete it." Anakin sighed as he liked the saying, but there was an issue with it. That lesson goes against the Jedi code. "And yet, I won't fall to the dark side if I keep them safe." Despite the truth in his words, there was a bit of mockery in it. Anakin shook his head. "I get the feeling that you are going to be the most difficult Jedi to deal with in the future." "Did the Force tell you that?" "No, a gut feeling." "Thanks again, Naruto." "No problem." Adm smiled at the conversation between the two and felt some sense of relief that someone knew their secret. She definitely liked the boy. Later, Chancellor's office. "Ah, Anakin, I am so glad to see you again, my boy." "It is good to see you as well, Chancellor." The four had made it to their destination and they greeted the old man as they moved to seats set up for them. Despite the smile on his face, Naruto grumbled to his inner occupants. "I really don't want to meet with this old man. He just gives me the creeps." "We know. You've been bitching about it ever since you were told about meeting up with the ancient creep. Regardless of how you feel, you were tasked to do this by the strict space monks. So suck it up and deal with it." "Ugh, why did I agree to become a Jedi again?" Yami rolled his eyes as he looked up at the ceiling as if speaking directly to Naruto. "Because you wanted to train in something different and it was in space. No other shinobi has ever been able to do so and you wanted to do something that not even the Hokages have done before." "Oh yeah. Still though, I'm now being put into discussions that have to do with a war that honestly, I don't even think I should be part of. I mean, my planet is all fine and dandy, so why should I put myself into a war like this? The three of us know that you aren't going to abandon the friends you made while here. So don't act like you are just going to say thanks for everything, bye. Me, I would just grab a ship and find some planet where we don't have to see Konoha again or these stick-up-the-ass Jedi." Naruto gave an internal wry smile as he thought. Sometimes it is hard to tell which one of us is the honest one and which is the liar. You know you wouldn't do that either. Not to our friends. Yami just scoffed as he turned away from the outside of the cage. He saw the fox looking at him and glared. "What?" Kurama just smirked as he laid down. "There is one thing I want to try later on. If you are willing to listen." Naruto listened to what Kurama had to say and he barely held back the look of dread appearing on his face. He was glad that he was sitting in the back and out of sight of everyone but the wrinkly old man. He was fortunate that he was not the center of attention, but what the nine-tailed fox just offered was incredibly dangerous. If it didn't, then he would just send up red flags to Anakin if it did work. They didn't know. But the fox wanted to try and see something. For now, he was going to sit here and listen to the political stuff about the bill and wait for a time to do it. After some time, they had finalized some of the details on the bill and some of the other dignitaries had left as the next thing to discuss was a military matter. Adm stayed more for being with Anakin and putting in her input as she knew some of the military aspects, but Anakin was the one that was the main contributor to this part. "It has come to my attention that there may be a new facility belonging to the separatists on Geonosis. Were they able to determine what kind of facility? Any sort of information about it would be helpful." The pilots of the ship were not able to acquire an accurate visual, but the number of battle droids seen around it is troubling. The Chancellor brought up an image for them to see the grainy image that was taken. Anakin looked at the image and could barely see much since it was of very poor quality. Naruto looked at the image as he walked closer to stand next to Anakin. Once he was close enough, he pointed out. "I think it's a factory." Seeing that he had everyone's attention he spoke. I've seen images from the archives about some factories and based on this part right here, that looks more like a conveyor belt moving to another area, I can only assume it is. But it looks like they have rocks on the belt. Most likely droids in their standby state. Naruto looked to Anakin as he, and interestingly, Padme had a look of distress on their faces. Palpatine leaned back in his chair as he sighed. So they have made another facility on the planet then. Naruto looked at the old man and asked. This isn't the first one they made one here. The old man shook his head. No, it is not. There was another one that was infiltrated and destroyed some time ago. We would have thought that they would have abandoned this planet for another one, but it appears we were wrong. Anakin crossed his arms as he looked at the image. Why would they want to try again on this planet? Padme chose to bring up a thought she had about this. Perhaps there are resources that are on the planet that they chose to use. Naruto's knowledge of the planet was very scarce, so he had little to say about the reason. Or maybe they didn't think you would look for another one. Palpatine nodded as he spoke. Whatever the reason, it is good that we have discovered this facility at such a time. If we are able to disrupt this one, we can deal a good amount of damage to General Grievous's operations. Anakin nodded but sighed in a little dejection. Regardless, it will take some time before we can send troops there to handle it. I can discuss this with the council, and we will probably send a scouting party first. Palpatine nodded. Indeed. Naruto thought about what was said and saw an opportunity. Okay, I've heard of his name before, but who is this General Grievous? He sounds like a big target that the Republican Jedi want to take down. The group looked at Naruto, and it took them a second to realize that he was still new to their war. It was almost refreshing to hear someone ask who the monster was. Palpatine chose to answer the boy. He is a monster that has plagued the Republic for some time now. A being of both machine and creature that has been trained in the ways of the Jedi. He is a high rank in the droid army and has made a reputation with the Jedi. Palpatine gave a tired sigh as he continued. He has become quite skilled in the use of lightsabers and finds enjoyment in slaying Jedi and taking their weapons as trophies. Now. Anakin immediately stood up from his seat, lightsaber igniting, and spun around in search of what he had just felt. Everyone was startled by his sudden action and looked at the man. Naruto turned his head to look at the older Jedi who reacted fairly quickly. Padme looked worried about the sudden action and asked. What is it? Anakin kept scanning the room as he was unsure of what it was. It was so brief that he wasn't able to pinpoint where it is or exactly what it is. He looked at Naruto and asked. Did you feel that? Naruto shook his head as he stood from his seat and began to focus on the area. After a minute he spoke. I don't feel anything off, and I don't have the feeling of being watched. What did you feel? I'm not sure. It appeared so fast that I might have missed it if I wasn't so tense. Palpatine spoke up in concern. Are you sure you sensed something? This is one of the most secure areas on Coruscant, and I do not believe that there would be any danger. Anakin kept looking, but after not sensing anything and Naruto saying he couldn't feel anything either, he was beginning to wonder if it was just in his head. I suppose that it might have been in my head. But I don't know. He disengaged his lightsaber and put it back on his belt. Palpatine gave a worried look to the man and spoke. Perhaps we should discuss matters another time. With how much the war can take a toll on people, you might be in need of rest. Anakin wanted to argue, but he just wasn't sure about this. Maybe. Naruto tapped him on the arm and nodded. Hey, you've been jumpy for a while, so maybe you imagined it. Anakin was beginning to calm down and looked at the boy. You weren't any help earlier. Naruto smiled as he stuck his tongue out. MHNG, I am known for being a pain back home. No way I wouldn't do the same here. Anakin chuckled at that before looking at the chancellor. Forgive me for the disruption and maybe I should take your advice. Take a break for a day or two. Palpatine nodded. Very good, my boy. We can discuss more about the facility later on. But I would recommend that you pass what we spoke of while you can. Yes sir. Padme stood up and the three bowed to the old man and began to make their way out of the room. Naruto kept his usual visage, but inside he was curious. Well. Not sure. This whole thing was so fast and you turned your head just as quickly. But in the brief moment, it looked like he turned his head in your direction. That isn't enough. This whole thing was not even a split second and we got nothing from it. Maybe, maybe not. If he turned his head towards me because of you sticking your finger out for only a second, then maybe he does have something to do with the dark side. But we didn't feel anything, so it could just be me being paranoid. Being paranoid is what kept us alive when we were younger. Regardless, whether or not that old crone has anything to do with the dark side of the tickle, we should be wary of him. Whatever he is, there is hidden negativity to him, but he has it deep. You couldn't feel anything negative. Wow, you're losing your touch. This coming from the one that has a talent in hiding your own darkness should know that there is a way to hide such things. Touché. He thought about what Kurama had wanted to test and it was just a mess. He already knew about General Grievous, there was some information about him in the archives. Naruto just used that as a chance to test out if there was anything linking the Chancellor to the dark side of the Force, and if there was, that would mean that the old man could be a Sith. Now that was harder to learn since the archives had little to nothing about the Sith and what they are capable of. This bothered him since he was taught that information was vital, and if the Sith were out there and they had to fight them, then they needed to know more about it. All he knew was that they used the dark side and that was it. So far, the test was a bust, and they did not want to try and do that again, especially since Anakin had dealt with it now, and any other Jedi would be far more alert than Anakin would be. Back in the office, Palpatine gained a look of intrigue. He had a smile on his face as he thought to himself. Such hate. Time skip. Come on guys, you gotta try a little harder than that. Hey, using your weird tricks is against the rules. Naruto was sitting on the side of a wall and smiling down at the group of younglings that were calling for him to come down. It had been a couple of days since the meeting with the Chancellor and he, Yami, and Kurama had discussed if there was any other way they could see if the old crone had anything to do with the dark side. The last test was inconclusive and they agreed that it wasn't enough. A lot of people would have just let this go and think it was just a bit of paranoia, but Kakashi made sure one of his lessons stuck with him. Look underneath the underneath. And Naruto trusted his gut on this one. But for now, that would have to wait since he was in one of the courtyards of the temple with a group of kids calling him a cheater. What rules, Petro? No one said that I couldn't use my abilities. He crossed his arms and legs as he looked nonchalant sitting on the wall. Ungi, male Wookiee, thought about it and he had to agree with Naruto as they did not say that he couldn't use his unique abilities. He is right, Petro. We should have said it when we started. Anodi, a female Rhodian, huffed as she crossed her arms. It still shouldn't be allowed since no one else can do what he can. Batuni, a female Philathian, had to agree with her fellow trainees. She looked up at Naruto and spoke. They are right, Naruto. You should keep it fair to the rest of us. Naruto's smile became solemn as he nodded. You're right. But there is something you younglings should know. Zat, male Nautilin, titled his head as he spoke. You aren't that much older than we are. If, male Ithorian, nodded as he looked up at Naruto. Only by a few years. Petro nodded. What could you know that we don't? Naruto nodded. Plenty. And yeah, I am just a few years older than you, but there are some things I learned that you should know as well. Petro crossed his arms and looked at him expectantly. And what is it? The bad guys won't play fair. Seeing that he had their attention he continued. The bad guys are gonna use dirty tricks and underhanded tactics in order to win. And this means that there are gonna be times when you will be at a disadvantage and there will be no way to even it out. In that case, you have to push forward and beat them while they play dirty. But if you want to win, you are sometimes gonna have to think of something random. You can play dirty on the cheaters but still be fair. Just don't stoop to their level. You are training to be the good guys. So be the good guys. For someone who had caused such mischief among the temple, you know how to speak such enlightening words. Naruto looked up behind the younglings to see Bariss walking toward them. He smiled as he jumped off the wall and landed in front of her with the children behind him. Hey Bariss. What are wa? Pile him. Naruto now found himself tackled and buried in the pile of younglings. He laughed as they held him down. Arg, foul play. Hahaha, foul play. He felt the kids hold his limbs down as they had captured him. Anodi gave a smug look as she said. It's not foul play. We just played dirty on the cheater. Naruto smirked back at her as he saw they used his words against him. You have learned well, young Padawan. Bariss smiled at the sight of Naruto under the younglings, and she spoke. A Padawan calling someone else a Padawan. I believe that is the first I have seen. Naruto tilted his head up to see Bariss standing patiently. Alright, guys, time to let this cheater up. I nominate Genodi to be the one to be Chaz now. The other youngling simultaneously looked at her and she knew that she had little time to react. She jumped off Naruto and ran off with the other younglings chazzing after her, laughing all the while. Bariss stepped forward and stood over the boy's head as she looked down at him as he was laying on the ground still. For all your odd tricks, you were taken down by younglings quite easily. She smiled at the action. Naruto looked up at her and smiled back. Beware the power of the younglings. You never know what kind of trickery they can have. He lifted his legs before jumping to his feet. He turned to her and bowed his greeting. Hey Bariss. It's been a while since I've seen you. He looked around and noticed. So where is Luminara? You two are usually together all the time. Bariss smiled and nodded. Master and Padawans tend to stay together most of their time, but at the moment she is in discussion with a few on the council, and I was given some time to myself. I felt that you were here and chose to see what trouble you were up to. Naruto crossed his arms as he gave a small pout. Hey, I don't get into trouble all the time. Shall I regale the time you had set up those childish gimmicks throughout the temple? Many of the Jedi were very cross with you after that. Naruto shrugged as he walked past her with her following. I put a few pranks throughout the temple and they think that it shows a lack of discipline. I got out of that by telling them that such things could happen on the battlefield and they should be ready for anything. Besides, the worst thing that happened to anyone was that they got wet. He sat under a tree that was on the side of the courtyard with Bariss sitting next to him. I made sure not to use any of my materials for other pranks since I don't know if any of the things I use would be fatal to the aliens. And I do not want to try and recreate my stuff with alien material. It took me a couple of weeks to make my own stuff back home and that was with stuff I know. Using stuff that I don't know could cause an explosion and cleaning up the mess afterward would not be worth it. I'm still not used to the stuff out here in the Republic, especially the food. Naruto remembered the first time he had actually eaten some of the alien food. It was when he had run out of rations that he had packed and made a choice to save the last 20 ramen packs for emergencies. He poked the green pudding. For a good few minutes before his inner fox told him to just eat it. He found out that it wasn't as bad as he thought. It just wasn't good. He could eat it, but after a few more food explorations, he made sure never to eat the brown mush that had some streaks in it again. It felt like it was trying to kill him from the inside out. He missed Ichiraku ramen. Bariss looked at him as she asked. Was your home so different from the Republic settlements? I have only heard small bits about your situation, since most of the masters are more impressed and slightly concerned about your level of progression. Choosing to ignore the concerned part, he elaborated on his home. My planet doesn't have any space travel. The most we could do was reach the skies, but even that was only because some separate village spent their time on making them, so most of the stuff we have is from our own planet. Unlike the Republic settlements, all the materials, products, weapons, etc. are made from stuff on world. You guys are used to droids, fighters, blasters, and a lot of automated stuff. But my planet doesn't have any of that. Bariss had a hard time imagining what life would be like on his planet. It sounded so far behind, yet Naruto had seemed to adapt well enough to their way of life. Though she was still foggy on the details as to how. There was something to do with his clones, but it wasn't widespread. Just that he had used clones to learn, but that was all she knew. It is best not to assume the mechanics of it until she had more details or the truth. What is the name of your system? You have always called it just the planet you came from, but I don't recall you ever saying the name of it. Naruto leaned on the tree and thought about it. I don't think it was actually given a name. We call the land we live on the elemental nations, but I don't know about the actual planet. Maybe Elementia or something like that. She smiled at him as she pointed out. You didn't put any thought into it, did you? No offense to those who have used that name. Sorry. Naruto gave a deadpan stare at her. Hey, I'm not the smartest guy out there. I just came up with that on the spot. Hey Naruto. Naruto and Bariss looked to see the younglings waving to him. Ungi called out to him as he asked. We caught her. Who's next? Naruto smiled as he pointed at the male human. Petro is next. 3-second head start, go. Petro went wide-eyed as he realized he was now the one to be chased. He looked to his friends before running away as they began the game again. Naruto smiled as he watched the kids run. Bariss watched as well as she asked. Why do you play these games with them? Naruto looked at her with a confused look. What do you mean? Normally the younglings would use their time to meditate or review the lessons that they had learned. Yet, you have them here chasing one another for frivolous activities. Why is this? Naruto shifted his gaze to the kids. Just because they are being trained to be soldiers doesn't change the fact that they are kids. Much like yourself. She gave a teasing smile at the small glare he gave her. I'm still years older than them. But anyway, they are kids, and I think they should spend some time laughing, having fun, and not thinking about the war that they will be a part of or think of the soldiers they will become. Bariss frowned at the statement and chose to correct him. They are being trained to become peacekeepers, not soldiers. Naruto looked in his peripheral vision at her before looking back at the kids. Peacekeepers in the middle of a war and sent out into the front lines to battle with battle droids and separatists. It sounds like a soldier to me. Had the same thing back home too. Kids are trained to fight and defend their home. I guess that is why I am fond of the younglings. They remind me of the kids back home, but weren't having the fun they should have. So I feel it is my duty to give it to them. Bariss turned to the kids and could see his viewpoint on what they are being trained to do. I suppose that they are being trained to be a sort of soldier, and I agree that younglings should have some form of enjoyment while they can. Naruto nodded. It is something worth fighting for. He gave a nonchalant gesture towards the kids. Peaceful times like this. So that others would live like this rather than be worried if something bad would come their way. Bariss nodded in agreement before she looked at him. Are you sure you are younger than me? You seem to have wisdom far beyond your years. Live your life ending for yourself and you pick up a few things. And take value in anything you gain. Bariss gained a worried look at that. But it is against the GD code to form attachments of any kind. Only because losing it could lead you to the dark side. But in my view, it is a matter of how you deal with losing something that is the real factor. If you lose someone, you have to realize that you aren't the only one that lost something. There are others out there that lose family, lovers, children, and friends, but they push forward and keep going on with their lives. I can understand feeling angry or sad, but you have to keep going. Feel sad or mad, but don't let it control you. He subconsciously put his hand on his stomach as he thought about the times before that he had become furious and used the corrupt power of Kurama. But he was able to push it back and control himself. Which he later found out, he was helped out by Yami. Bariss thought about his words and could see the wisdom in them, but they conflicted with what she had learned in her life in the GD Order. You are truly wise beyond your years. So I've been told. Several times. Ah, there you are, Naruto. Everyone turned to the voice to see Kid Fisto making his way to the two under the tree. The younglings stopped in their playing to see what the master would want with Naruto. Naruto stood up with Bariss following his lead with him bowing to the master while she curtsied. Both spoke at the same time. Master Fisto. Kid Fisto chuckled as he raised a hand. At ease, you two. Naruto, I believe that you are late to meeting up with your trainer today. Naruto began to internally sweat as he remembered the last time he was late with his trainer. Windu was merciless in his drills. Sorry, master, who was the one to train me today? This chuckled as he gestured to himself. Me, of course. Naruto gave a mental sigh of relief as he knew that Kid Fisto was one of the more forgiving masters he had. And this meant that he would be practicing. Sorry to be so late in meeting you, Master Fisto. I was a little distracted. Fisto nodded as he looked at the younglings. I see that. It is good to see smiles on the young. He nodded at them before looking at the blonde. But we should get to your training. He pulled out a practice saber and handed it to the boy. We can do it here since there is plenty of space for us. The younglings heard this and grew excited at the thought of witnessing this practice duel. They moved to stand under the tree Bariss was standing under, with the older Padawan watching as Naruto and Fisto moved to stand away from each other. Naruto adjusted the handle in his hand till he got a good grip on it before he looked up at the master. So what are the limits this time? Kid Fisto smiled at the boy before he spoke. As much as I would like to see what other tricks you can come up with, this is to practice your mastery in the forms. So please refrain from using any of your shinobi tricks. Only the forms and usage of the force. Naruto groaned at that. Aw, you take the fun out of it. This caused the younglings to laugh and Fisto to chuckle. When you are in battle, you are free to use them, but for now, let us start with Form 5. You have become very proficient in the usage of Form 6, and I have heard that you have started to create new moves and tactics that you are able to apply due to your skills, but you should know that you should not allow the other forms to fall behind. Naruto nodded as he ignited the green saber and took the form stance, with the saber put into a reverse grip and moved behind his back while his left hand was extended in front of him and he lowered his center of gravity. In response, Fisto took the Form 3 stance as the forms were sort of counterparts to each other. The two faced off against each other for a few seconds before Naruto charged forward, making sure not to use his chakra to enhance his speed. Don't want to disappoint the master. Kid Fisto smiled as he saw Naruto holding back his abilities to focus only on his lightsaber skills. They had worked on that the first time they dueled. He was glad they used practice sabers for that since the boy had some skill and speed on him. Kid Fisto parried the low horizontal slash that was aimed at his left leg before pushing back the blade to parry to follow up to his arm. Shoving back the blade, he brought his own down on the boy's shoulder and was blocked with the boy lowering himself to bring his lightsaber into position to block the strike. Naruto shifted to let the attack fall to the side and brought his weapon to strike at the master. Each time he brought his lightsaber to a strike, they were parried away and he would block a strike that came in after 3 to 5 of his own strikes. This kept going, but Naruto kept pushing forward, both maintaining his form and holding back his chakra. This sucks. Get over it. Use the force and all that. Shut it, you damn furball. He blocked the strike to his torso before thrusting at Fisto's shoulder. The younglings watched in anticipation as Naruto was pushing back Master Fisto. They began to cheer him on as they thought he was winning the duel by pushing the master back. Etro was the one to speak to the others. He is actually beating the master. Bungie stared wide-eyed at the sight. This was the first time they had actually witnessed a practice duel of this level. He was also surprised to see someone that was once in their class and not knowing how to do what they could, dueling one of the GD masters and winning. He really is. I can't believe it. He is not winning. The younglings looked at Bariss as she was beepizing the duel. Naruto is using Form 5, which is an offensive form to take out an opponent. Master Fisto however is using Form 3, which is more of a drawn-out defensive form. Well, Form 5 is useful in battle, Form 3 is to wear out your opponent to the point they will make a mistake and give you an opening. She narrowed her eyes at the blonde as she continued. Though I am sure that he knows this. Benodi looked at her and asked. How do you know? Bariss thought back to the times she had helped him in his training. I have dueled with him and I am proficient in using Form 3, so he should know about this. Naruto smirked as he kept pushing back Master Fisto. He knew what the master was doing, but the thing was that Form 3 was meant to tire the opponent. What do you do when your opponent has enough energy to last for hours and still not be winded? He saw the next vertical strike coming and sidestepped it to allow Master Fisto's back to be exposed. Spinning leftward, he brought his saber onto Master Fisto's back, only to be blocked at the last second. Master Fisto shifted his body to allow Naruto's weight to slide off him, and he sent a kick to the boy's side. Naruto brought up his arm to block the kick before grabbing it and spinning Master Fisto into a throw. Master Fisto smiled at the tactic as he landed on his feet. He stood up straight as got out of the stance. Very well done, Naruto. Your skill in the form has improved since the last time we dueled. Naruto got out of his stance and smiled. Thank you, Master Fisto. The two bowed to each other as they disengaged their lightsabers. Fisto walked up to the boy and patted him on the shoulder. I am sure that if you had used your full abilities, you would have won against me. He gave a foxy smile at the older Jedi. Well, I am a one-of-a-kind Jedi. Fisto nodded. That you are, but remember to stay humble with your abilities. Your skills make you unique, but in the forms of the lightsaber, you still have much to learn, even if you are creating your own form unique to you. Yes, master. Nodding, the older Jedi held out a hand for the practice saber. Once he was given the weapon, he smiled wider. I believe that you are now ready. Naruto tilted his head as he asked what he, Bariss, and the younglings were wondering. Ready for what? The create own lightsaber, ready you are. Everyone looked to the side to see Master Yoda walking up to them with a smile on his face. Naruto looked at the Grandmaster and asked. Master. Trained hard you have. Master, soon you shall have, but own lightsaber, you must make. Time it is, to do so. This caused the younglings to cheer as they ran up to Naruto and gathered around him. Each exclaiming that it was cool that he was going to get his own lightsaber. Naruto smiled as he had actually forgotten about making his own. But wouldn't lie and say he wasn't excited about it. Wonder how it will come out. Yoda nodded as he smiled up at the boy. Yes, materials we must gather, for the journey ahead. This caught Naruto by surprise. You mean you're the one that is going to help me with this? Indeed. Curious I am, on the saber you make. Naruto was curious about the way that was said, but chose not to question it. He had learned of the ways to construct a lightsaber, but this would be the first time he would do something like this. Wonder how this will go. Bariss walked up to him and smiled. I look forward to seeing what sort of lightsaber you construct. Naruto nodded as he smiled. So do I. The next day, Naruto was on his way to Ilum with a few Jedi masters joining him. The main one was Master Yoda, as he had suggested they do something a little different from what the other younglings have done in the past few generations. Is it really necessary for all of you to come? Don't you have other duties to attend to? Mace Windu crossed his arms as he smiled at the boy. That much is true, but this is something that many haven't seen in a long time. Oh come on, it isn't that big of a deal. You've built your own lightsabers and you have seen hundreds of different designs in your life. It was Shakti that told him more details. Yes, but those were made by thought and understanding of what they would be comfortable with. But with you, we are doing the entire process at once. This hasn't been done in a long time, but you have advanced at such a rapid rate that we believe it would be best to use this method. Naruto knew that he had advanced far faster than anyone else in the Jedi Order, but he did it out of necessity, not to get special treatment. He felt a slap on his back and looked back to see Kit Fisto smiling at him. You should feel honored to do this. Despite how others create their blades in a more practical sense, this is more of an old traditional way of making the saber. Naruto sighed as he didn't know why he was having this discussion, since they were already in hyperspace towards the planet. And Plo Koon wasn't able to come to talk you guys out of this. Fisto chuckled as he responded. He would have joined us to witness this. Though I say witness loosely. Grandmaster Yoda smiled up at the boy before suggesting. Some time before we arrive. Meditation we should do. Naruto looked at the Grandmaster and nodded. When Yoda suggested meditation to him, it usually meant a lesson in the Force. There were still things he needed to learn about it, and what he did learn, he was still working on incorporating into his own style. The two left the command center with the other masters staying behind. Once the two were gone, Master Fisto looked at Mace Windu and Shakti with a slight frown on his face. I understand why Shakti and I wished to come along, we have grown fond of the boy and his spirited nature. Even Plo Koon, but what of you, Master Windu? You have been concerned about the boy since he arrived. This grew even more so when he had shown advancement far beyond anyone we have seen before. Mace Windu nodded as he crossed his arms. I have my concerns about him and I am not the only one. He has learned much about our ways and he has even begun practicing my style of lightsaber combat, something I have done my best to not show anyone. But in dueling him, he has learned to mimic some of it to the point that I had to show him the rest so as to not be tempted by the dark side that it incorporates. Someone so young and skilled to be that close to the dark side is. Concerning. Shakti nodded as she understood his reasoning. Yes, but so far he has shown no signs of being tempted by such, and the knowledge he has obtained has been to catch up with his new peers, not overtake them. Mace Windu knew that he was basing this off on being uncertain about him, since he didn't know the boy that well, only what he observed through form training. He just felt that the boy was holding back a secret that was dangerous. He sighed as he looked at his fellow council members. I hold no hostility towards the boy, I'm just being cautious. We already have a Sith out there to contend with. I do not want one of our own to turn. They both nodded as they also did not want that for the boy. Fisto regained his smile as he changed the subject. So, what kind of hilt do you suppose he will make? Shakti thought about the boy's style and tried to come up with her input. He shows proficiency in speed and flexibility. Perhaps a short hilt will be his preference. Fisto hummed in thought. It would go well with his moves, but I can also see him with a curved hilt. To allow faster movement with his wrist to turn in time to parry. Mace Windu nodded, but he had his own opinion. I can see him using the standard length. Balanced in both defense and offense. I have seen some of his style and I can say that it would help him greatly. Fisto chuckled as there was no arguing that fact. He has also shown usage of dual wielding. Perhaps he will come out with two. Shakti shook her head. I do not believe he would go that route. Though he has shown that he could, he does not seem that fond of the style. I believe that he finds the two to limit his options with his free hand. Mace Windu nodded in agreement. And double-bladed would be even more limiting, even with his agility. The three masters smiled as they tried to guess what type of blade this little trial would reveal. After all, the make of one's lightsaber reveals some of who they are. Feel the force guide you down your path. Show you things it can. The future, the past, great distance it can show. Naruto sat in a meditative position as he allowed the force to guide his mind. It felt like he was in a drift through the clouds, but nothing could be seen clearly. After a few more seconds of this, he began to see foggy images of things that were familiar to him. Shizune. Where did you hide my sake? Feel, don't think. Use your instincts. Shishu, you're needed at the hospital. You want to name him after one of that pervy sage's characters from his smut books. At last we shall reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last, we will have our revenge. Ooh, yeah baby. Take it off and turn this way so I can get a look at your inspirational view. Anakin, drop. Madara, why attack Konoha? Why attack the village we built together? It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back. You will know pain. Inhale, exhale. Naruto's eyes shot open and yelped as he jumped back only to have to wave his arms in the air as he lost his balance and fell off his seat. Ow. Seen much, you have. Confused, I sense. Naruto propped himself up and leaned his chin on his seat as he sat on the ground. You could say that. I read that the Force could let you see stuff from the past and future, but I didn't think it would be so messy. Yoda nodded. Untrained in this you are. For first try, impressive it is. Enlighten me, what's seen? Naruto got up from the ground and sat on the seat once more. He scratched his head as he explained what he saw. It was. Hazy. I couldn't get a good look at whatever it was, but I could recognize some of the voices I heard, but there were some that I never heard before. Got glimpses of the people I know from back home and the unknown people, but that was it. I don't know if I was looking at the future or the past or where it was. But I know that some of them must be out here in the Republic space, since I heard Anakin's and Obi-Wan's names. Yoda thought about what he was told and figured that the boy might be seeing a mixture of things. Mixed sights perhaps. Future, past, present, seen you might. Train and focus you should. Naruto nodded since this experience was disorienting. Thinking of seeing events from the past, present and future got him thinking of something. Master Yoda, if you can see the future, is it possible to change what you've seen? Yoda gained a look of curiosity and asked. Unpleasant event seen, have you? Wished to change it? Naruto shook his head. No, I didn't see anything clearly and as I said, I couldn't tell if it was the future or the past. I was just curious since I have seen stories where someone saw the future and wanted to change it. I was just curious if we could change it. He also had a small flashback to when he fought Niji during the Chunin exams and his talk about fate. Where it was his fate to lose to the Hyuga, but in the end, he came out on top with a good uppercut axe kick combo, leaving Niji wedged in the dirt. Even if that wasn't really seeing the future, that even made Naruto want to make his own fate and not let some outside force dictate what he could and couldn't do. Yoda rubbed his chin as he nodded. Change possible it is, but clear the view must be to know how. Clouded the future might be, but yes. Naruto smiled at that. Thank you, Master Yoda. I'd just like to know that my future isn't automatically dictated. That I could make it my own and maybe better than what it would have been. The old master hummed at this. Focus only on this, you should not. The Force guide you, it will. Down the path you must take. Yes, master. I don't plan to change everything. It just gives me some peace of mind. Indeed. Good, this is. Now clear your mind. Do again. Naruto smiled as he couldn't help himself. I'll try. No. Do or do not. There is no try. Naruto had heard this saying before and he really liked the saying coming from the old master. He knew that you had to try in order to do something or not do something, but the saying was more on, you either do it or fail until you actually do it. At least that was how he could see it. Of course, Master Yoda. Yoda smiled at the boy as he knew that he would say the word try just to get him to say it. Naruto closed his eyes, but before he began to do it again, he gave a mental smirk. Hear that, guys? At least we know that if shit is in our future, we can change it. That's not to overuse it. Seeing all that can't be good for you. I'm not going to sit down every day and see what I'm gonna eat the next day. Besides, where's the fun if you know everything that is gonna happen? Though, the fact that you saw some stuff from Konoha is interesting. Something we should test out later on. You have another task to do soon. Yeah. Naruto went back to his meditation, unaware that he had gained a curious look from Yoda. Ilum. The ship landed on the icy planet as a heavy blizzard was raging on. The ramp of the ship lowered with the Jedi coming out in winter clothing. Naruto was rubbing his arms as he looked around. So, this is Ilum. Still better than Suna during a sandstorm. Shakti walked past him before gesturing to him. Come on, young one. We must hurry as the sun is soon to rise. Naruto nodded as he ran up to catch up with the Jedi. Fisto patted his shoulder as they made their way through the snowstorm. So, did you bring everything? Naruto reached into his coat and pulled out a scroll to show the masters. Yeah, I got everything you told me I should get. Though I think the droid is mad at me because he thinks I destroyed all of the materials he had in his storage. The Jedi chuckled at that as they could imagine how those who have not seen this trick before would react to it. The droid in charge of holding the lightsaber pieces would act if he saw all of them disappear. Mace Windu looked at the scroll and nodded. I have to say that the ability to store anything in that little roll of paper must be extremely useful for travel. It's a shame we are unable to mass produce such a thing. Naruto stored the scroll back into his jacket before he shrugged. I actually tried to see if I could use the Force to make the same, but it didn't work. The Force and Chakra are just too different. Fist nodded, but he didn't lose his smile. Well, perhaps we can learn new ways of using the Force to mimic some of your abilities. To walk on walls does seem like a very handy trick. And I do look forward to whatever else you are able to do with your chakra. Naruto looked at Fisto and was about to say something till he was interrupted by Shakti. We know that you are able to do more with your chakra than you have shown us. The amount of versatility in what you have shown us does hint that there is more you can do. Naruto sighed as he nodded. It's just that a lot of the things I know are meant for fighting. And a lot of the other Jedi are wary of me already. I don't want to give them anything more to do so. Mace Windu nodded at this. But hiding it will only cause more distrust from others. Like you. Mace Windu looked over his shoulder at the boy to see a neutral face on the blonde. I can read people very well. Even if you are usually serious all the time, I can tell that you have some distrust in me. At some point, I'll get you to trust me and know I am only here to help. Saying it like that does make you seem suspicious. Hey, I'm a kid. I'm the last person to think I have some evil plan about a group of people I had no clue about till Ahsoka crash landed near my hunting trap. Shakti looked at him and smiled. You will gain their trust soon enough. You are very open about yourself. Naruto gave a foxy smile at them, causing Kid Fisto and Mace Windu to smile at him as well. For the next 15 minutes, they walked through the snowstorm and so far, Naruto couldn't see anything apart from the few feet ahead of him. He would have questioned if they knew where they were going, but with how sure they looked, he figured they did. Soon they came to a massive wall of ice that seemed to go on forever from left to right. Despite this, Naruto felt something ahead of him, but he wasn't sure what. The Jedi walked forward before looking at the young blonde with Mace Windu speaking. Well, young Uzumaki, here we are. Focus the Force and the path will show itself. He as well as the other Jedi masters lifted their hands and focused on the wall in front of them. Naruto saw this and followed suit and focused the Force on the spot that it was telling him to focus on. Soon the wall in front of them began to shift as ice chunks began to lower down to reveal a structured entrance. Naruto was surprised by the sight as he hadn't seen something like this before. He followed the masters inside and immediately felt something sacred about this place. It felt like the Force, but it felt different from what he had felt before. Yoda moved to a small pedestal in the center of a tall circular chamber, with the other masters standing around him and gazes locked on the boy. Naruto stood a few feet away as they began to speak. Mace Windu was the first to speak. A Jedi is the physical embodiment of the Force. Shakti continued. This means that it comes with a great responsibility. Kit Fisto picked up from here. The protection of others is our task, and we hold on to this task. Yoda smiled as he started. Protect others, how does a Jedi, The 4 Jedi pulled out their lightsaber and used a force to have them float in front of them and ignite, with Yoda's being the only one to slowly spin around. Wield your own lightsaber, you shall. But first, harvest your crystal you shall. From here was Mace Windu. The crystal is the heart of the lightsaber. It followed up. The crystal focuses the force from the Jedi. Shakti smiled as she finished. The lightsaber and the Jedi are one. Yoda looked up and used a force to open up a small window that let in sunlight as it shined on a crystal ornament. He then caused it to spin till the light reflected from the large crystal shined on a smaller one in a specific direction, causing a single beam of light to shoot out to a frozen waterfall. Naruto watched as the water melted to reveal another pathway. The whole event seemed elegant in a way, as the waterfall seemed to glow gold from the sunlight till the pathway gained that color. The Jedi then grasped their sabers and pointed them toward the pathway and spoke at the same time. Enter the cave and let the force guide you to your crystal. Naruto looked at the entrance and nodded before he walked to it. As he walked, Kit Fisto spoke to him. You have till the sun goes down, as the waterfall will freeze over the entrance when it happens. When it does, you will be trapped till the sun comes up again in 19 days. Naruto gave a hum of acknowledgement and paused at the entrance before taking a breath to walk in. He smiled and nodded as he heard. Be careful in there, young one. He didn't look back as he entered. Once the boy was in, the Jedi disengaged their sabers and stood as began the wait till he came back. Fisto crossed his arms as he looked at the Grandmaster. So, what type of saber do you believe he will make? Yoda smiled as he looked at the entrance. Unique to him it will be. Naruto walked through the caves as he looked for any sign of what would be his kyber crystal. But so far, he saw nothing distinguishing from the other parts. Not to mention that he also thought about the feeling he had that was flowing through the entire caverns. Pay attention. You can think about what that tingle is later on. Hey, this whole place feels like it and it's bugging me. Just get the crystal and get out of here. It's about time you get your own shiny sword. As Naruto walked deeper into the cave, he couldn't help but mention. You know, ever since we came out in space, you've mellowed out a lot, Yami. Why the fuck do you think? Everything that we hate is back on the planet we left behind. I don't have a reason to actually be pissed or hate anything here. Even if the Jedi have a stick up their asses that makes the Hyuga clan look free-spirited, I have no reason to hate them. And so far, we have been messing with them enough to appease me. Oh, we aim to please, your majesty. Piss off. Naruto had stopped keeping track of time and just used the light of the sun that came in through several different areas to tell him how long he had left. And so far, he had nothing. Or at least that's what he thought. As he passed several areas, there was a sparkle in several crystals that were embedded in the walls. They reacted to what he had on him. After some time, Naruto crossed his arms as he leaned on a wall. Okay, so I have found nothing to tell me if it is my kyber crystal. He looked around the hall he was in inside. Any ideas, guys? Use the tingle to find it. They did say that it would guide you. Naruto couldn't help but smirk at the name as he asked. Why do you keep calling it tingle? So far, they have shown me nothing impressive. Naruto shrugged as he pushed off the wall and walked through the hall. I'm sure we will do something that will impress you at some point. We'll see. He made it to the end of the hall and paused as he saw that he made it to a dimly lit dome-shaped cavern with a lake that took up most of the ground. He looked at the water and saw that there was a small platform in the center of it. Well, roaming around isn't getting me anywhere, so I might as well use this as a spot to find it. Dietrich, don't you think? What's wrong with that? He took a step on the water, causing it to ripple. Once the ripple made it to the wall, the whole chamber lit up as some of the crystals lit up. He looked around and narrowed his eyes as he felt that feeling from before, pulse. It was then that he realized what the feeling was. The feeling I got was the force, but it isn't aligned with anything. Neither light nor dark. Makes sense. If what we learned is anything to go by, these crystals pull the force out of the ones that use them. So maybe it stays neutral till someone gives it alignment. We can think about this later, just get to finding. Fine. He walked across the water till he made it to the ice platform. Well, I guess I could use this. He sat cross-legged in the center of the platform and took a deep breath before he pulled out his scroll. He placed it in front of him and placed his fingers on one of the seals on it. Coming out of the seal was a roll of fabric which was unrolled to show a layout of small mechanical parts. Naruto grabbed a fabric and moved it to his left before he unsealed another set which he moved to his right. He did this a few more times till he was surrounded by a circle of fabrics that had different parts. All this took up the small amount of space the platform had with Naruto in the center. You sure this will work? Well, if I can feel out where it is, then maybe I can bring it to me. Kind of an extra step to what I was told, but it shouldn't be that different. Well, let's get this started. You make it sound like you have anything to do with this. We are stuck with you in this. Naruto sighed as he just figured to get this over with. Closing his eyes, he began to focus on where his kyber crystal would be. Shutting out his surroundings and allowing the force to guide him. Play. Star Wars: The Force Suite theme or Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker final trailer music. The chamber began to flicker with the light of a few kyber crystals flickering and a shimmer flowing around the chamber. A small breeze flowed around Naruto, gently brushing the water and causing soft ripples to disturb the water. The wind then moved throughout the chamber and down the tunnel. It continued to expand and brushed across the walls, as if a small air of mist covered the chamber. Small droplets of water began to levitate in the air, causing the chamber to sparkle even more. Then a blue haze came out of Naruto's body, as if he was lit aflame with it joining the wind. Naruto's clothes began to gently flap in the wind as the wind grew. Out of his jacket came the necklace that he had won from Tsunade and had never taken off. The mechanical parts began to float off the fabrics and spin around him with the wind, water, and chakra. Naruto's mind then began to show images of those he knew and cared about. All the people who had stood by him, pushed him forward, and believed in him. He thought about what he was doing this for. Why he had chosen to go out and learn something new. He felt that his kyber crystal had been found and called the crystal to him. He kept his eyes closed as he allowed the force to guide his actions, but obeyed his will on who he truly was. Hearts began to shift and move closer to each other as they began to connect and shape into the lightsaber meant for him. The wind and water began to shape themselves into fine blades as they flowed around the lightsaber construct. Naruto was then told that it was time for him to pour his force into the crystal and raised his hand till his palm was under the crystal brought to him. He saw haze swirl around his arm, to his palm, and into the crystal. Unseen by him was that the jewel of the Hokage necklace glowed brightly as energy swirled from it into the crystal as well, causing the kyber crystal to take on the color meant for Naruto. Naruto did not know how long the construction was, but the force had guided him to its completion, and soon, the hazy view he had around him faded to just in front of him as he saw the pieces finally complete themselves around the kyber crystal, and he knew that it was done. He opened his eyes to see the light of the chamber leave, making it hard to see anything, but he did see that floating above him was what he had come here for. Standing up, he looked at it and smiled at what was in front of him. Both Yami and Kurama had the same thing to say. Interesting. The Jedi masters watched as the waterfall was slowly coming over the entrance of the cave. It had been some time since the boy had entered and they had felt that burst in the force that came from the chamber. This had interested Yoda as he had not felt this kind of reaction from any of the previous gatherings. It was then they heard footsteps coming from the cave and saw the boy walk out, just barely ducking under the ice. Naruto walked toward the four masters and smiled at them. Hitfisto looked at the boy with a smile on his face as he asked, "How'd it go?" Naruto said nothing as he reached behind him and brought it up. He held it in both hands and ignited it so the light of the blade cascaded over his face. Yoda smiled as he saw the new lightsaber that now belonged to the blonde. "Done well you have. A Jedi, now you are." End chapter. So this part ends here. If you want to see next part of this series, like the video now and share the story with your friends. Bye bye.